instead of a silly cold opening today, I'm going to do a more somber one. Here's to Debbie Reynolds and Carrie Fisher. Go ahead and drink. And to any other star that passed in the last year, because there's a lot of them. Today's beer of the week is a Chardonnay barrel-aged wheat wine from Empyrean Brewing Company in honor of their 25th anniversary. They're a pretty good brewing company. I've had a lot of stuff from them, and most of it's been pretty good. I have never had a wheat wine before, except for the other bottle of this that was in the package. But it's a pretty interesting, very tasty style of beer. So, cheers again. Anyways, welcome to the show made by the people. The people being me, and the show being the show that you are currently watching. If you could not infer that, then I'm sorry. You are not smart enough to view this show. I'm kidding. I need the viewership. Please, don't change the channel. Today's list is my top 5 favorite Star Wars games. And it was going to be a different list, but I decided to change in honor of Carrie Fisher. So, here's to you. Thanks for Free Galaxy. My 5th favorite Star Wars game of all time is this old Star Wars game just called Star Wars for the original Game Boy. And I believe it was a port of the Super Nintendo game, but I'm not sure. I had an emulator at one point that played Super Nintendo games, and it played the same Star Wars games, so I'm not really sure how that all went, but I believe it was released on both platforms. Anyways, it was a kind of a cool little game. You started out in a land speeder and dodged some rocks, and mostly you exploded because the controls weren't very good at that point. And then you got into like this totally different sort of area where you're just running around in your land speeder all over Tatooine, and you find your way through different places and explore caves and find a sand crawler, and it's a really just a kind of a fun, interesting game. I might just love it because of nostalgia, but I go back and I play it again every now and then. I still have the old Game Boy cartridge, and it's great fun. The gameplay is simple but challenging. It's just a little side scroller when you get into the like levels that are just kind of interspersed throughout this little, you know, top-down view world that you run your land speeder through. And then you get in there and you shoot some Tusken Raiders or some Jawas or whoever might be trying to kill you for no apparent reason. The story is very unclear, but it's just a ton of fun running around as Luke Skywalker in that Star Wars kind of universe, especially to any child that lived through that original Game Boy era. Just like finding the lightsaber was like the capstone achievement of my childhood as far as gaming goes, I think. So that's why that's on the list. Also, it was a kind of a cool sort of a little sandbox game. The whole world you could just explore right from the get-go, and I think that element didn't see any reuse such as it was for a long time. There was kind of a large area of gaming where open worlds didn't exist, and I don't think that really necessarily needed to happen, but that's just kind of the way gaming shifted, and I'm happy that a lot of games are shifting back now, and I think that this may have been at least a little part of the inspiration for that happening. Number 4 favorite Star Wars game of all time is Star Wars The Force Unleashed. Now, a lot of people actually like this game better for other consoles, but I actually played it on the Nintendo Wii because I'm a Nintendo fanboy. But it was really cool, actually. I really liked the motion controls, using the Force to push your guys and stabbing and slashing and all that kind of thing. It was just a really clever use of the Wii Remote and Nunchuck system. It was so much fun. I just was like geeking out the whole time. I'm like, I can push people with the Force. I got my lightsaber. I had a little peripheral that you plug the Wii Remote into and it lights up and everything. And it was like, it's a really awesome game. Other than that, it's also kind of cool that they kind of used a little area of the Star Wars timeline that is not really touched on. You know, it's like, what was Darth Vader doing this whole time? Oh, he was raising this apprentice in secret, but you never would have known. So it's really a cool kind of look at another perspective in the timeline. We haven't drunk for 2 whole entries on the list, so drink. Where's my drink button? There it is. I couldn't find it for a second, so drink twice. Number 3 Star Wars game is Jedi Knight Jedi Academy. This was another kind of an interesting look at the timeline after the original trilogy had happened. And this was kind of a unique game because several story elements for a large period of the story were actually referring back to events that happened in Knights of the Old Republic. And I think just using elements from other video games was a really cool story driving mechanic. I think it was a really interesting follow-up because it was absolutely nothing like Knights of the Old Republic gameplay-wise, but the fact that they just kind of used this throwback to the story of Knights of the Old Republic, I thought was very well placed, and it made for a really fun storyline. In addition to having a great single-player experience with a cool storyline, its multiplayer aspect was actually a ton of fun. Me and my brothers and several other people actually years later came back to this game for quite a while, and it was so much fun just, you know, running around killing each other horribly in a Star Wars kind of a setting. And it was really actually pretty balanced multiplayer because you could use any weapon, and for the most part they were all basically balanced. My second favorite Star Wars game of all time is Star Wars Battlefront. The original one for, I think, the original Xbox. Might have been Xbox 360. This was a really awesome game because you get to play through a lot of those classic battles from the whole Star Wars trilogy, and in addition to playing through these legendary battles, you get to make it go one step further because you can play either side during these battles, and you can rewrite the history of Star Wars, basically. It's just crazy how clever they had to be to make all these things happen, you know, because they had to rewrite an extra story for every way that the rebellion lost or whatever. The multiplayer experience in this game was really awesome because of the cooperative multiplayer. You know, I could be one guy on the rebellion and my brother could be the other guy or whatever. You know, I think we had system link games going where you had 4 players or something that you could, you know, all be together in this battle against the Empire or for the Empire. That was one of the most fun things, was running around, you know, doing all these alternate storylines and killing Gungans willy-nilly just cuz. That was awesome. I hate Gungans so much. If you like Gungans, you have to drink. But then this game finally gave every child his dream of being able to drive a freaking AT-AT. Or AT-AT, if you will. But we won't get into that argument here. Finally, my number 1 favorite Star Wars game of all time is Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Knights of the Old Republic was fantastic for so many reasons. It was kind of the first game at the time to do what it had done on such a grand scale. Because there was other games where you could kind of choose your own adventure before, but I think Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic kind of took this idea and like pushed it forward a notch. They really made it an immersive story experience where you could basically play any way you wanted to, and that kind of springboarded into so many other kinds of games like that. And you can argue that there were games that did that before that, but none of them really pushed this style of gaming into the light like Knights of the Old Republic did. You know, and then now you get your Skyrim and your Mass Effect, and all these games where you get to choose your own adventure and roleplay the way you want to. And a lot of it, boiled down, goes back to Knights of the Old Republic. Without that, I don't think that we would have these games on nearly the scale we have them. This all goes back to what is Knights of the Old Republic. It's an RPG. And a lot of the time, I feel like game companies forget what the RP stands for. You know, a lot of them just think RPG means you can level up. And, you know, then it just tells you a story. I'm looking at you, Final Fantasy. Not that I actually mind most Final Fantasy games, except for 12. That was awful. But, you know, to a certain extent, the roleplay really makes the series and the genre what it is. In addition to having awesome story elements and all that, it had a really unique integration of the D20 system. That's right, if you didn't know that, Knights of the Old Republic actually ran off of the same number system as Dungeons & Dragons, basically 3.5. It was a modified version of that for making it work with Star Wars, but that's what it was. Every time you attacked, you rolled a virtual d20 to hit, and it was really clever because a lot of the time it felt like it was a real-time combat system, but it really wasn't. You were just queuing up your attacks for your next turn, and the computer would make all the turns happen at once, but it was still turn-based combat, and that was just such a neat idea. Now that we've pondered long and hard about the phrase Star Wars, we can finally lay our drinks to rest with Carrie Fisher and her mother, and actually probably a lot of other actors who have gone before from the Star Wars franchise, but nobody cared because they weren't Carrie Fisher. And Mark Hamill's getting pretty old, so let's raise one to him just because he lived through 2016. Thanks for watching, guys. Be sure to check me out on Facebook and look up my crappy website. And most importantly, would you please share and comment? Because I'd really like this thing to be more of a conversation than just me blabbing about stuff. Alright, thanks, guys. Well, I guess I shouldn't say that. There's 3 days left. Here's to Mark Hamill, whether he lived through 2016 or not.